Like I said before, the most important factor in your diet are your calories. But what exactly is a calorie? A calorie is the amount of energy needed to raise the temperature of 1 liter of water by 1 degree Celsius. So that means a calorie is an energy unit. Please keep in mind that I'm referring to food calories here when I say this. Food calories are also known as large calories or kilocalories, and they are what you will find on food labels. Food calories are usually spelled with an uppercase C. Unfortunately, and this often leads to confusion, there are also small calories which are spelled with a lowercase c. These are the calories most researchers use, and 1 large calorie equals 1,000 small calories. But since we're only at the beginning of the course and I don't want to confuse you already, all you need to know is that within dieting and nutrition, when people refer to calories, they usually mean large calories, balances, and you can only be in one state at any time. The first is a negative calorie balance. This happens when someone burns more calories than he or she consumes. Here, your body needs more calories to produce energy for your daily functions than it gets from your food. That means it has to make up the difference by burning stored energy, meaning you will lose weight. Because the necessary energy will come from the breakdown of body tissue, a negative calorie balance always results in weight loss. Now, this can sometimes be masked by changes in water retention, but if we exclude this factor, there have been 0 exceptions in medical history so far discovered. The second state is a neutral calorie balance. Here, a person's intake of calories is the same as his or her expenditure on activities and body processes. This means all the calories you consume will be used for some form of body process and your weight will remain stable. Of course, calorie intakes and activities on any given day are not going to be 100% the same. But over the course of weeks and months, a neutral calorie balance is definitely possible. If your weight hasn't changed over the last few months, your calorie balance is almost always neutral. The third and last state is a positive calorie balance. Here, more energy is taken in through food than is being burned to produce body processes or movement. As I explained before, in this case, the extra calories are stored as either glycogen in the muscle and liver or as fat. Okay, now that you know the fundamentals behind calorie balance, let's see how all this dry theory can help us with actual real-life dieting. If you just want to build muscle, also known as bulking, you have it very easy. Simply set up your diet according to the steps we outlined before and follow a small calorie surplus. Then you're good to go. The same applies if you want to lose fat, also known as cutting, but instead of the calorie surplus, you will go with a calorie deficit. Nothing new so far. But what if you want to do both? What if you want to build muscle and lose fat? Because one requires a calorie surplus and one a deficit, they contradict each other. So which goal are you supposed to start with? Let's begin talking about who should bulk first. This is an option if you're fairly skinny and don't mind a bit of extra body fat. Let me explain. You see, when you bulk, you will almost always gain at least some body fat along with the muscle you're building. That's just the nature of being in a calorie surplus. It's a normal part of the process and you have to accept it. Now don't get me wrong, there is a big difference between gaining pounds of excess body fat because you're eating 2,000 calories above your TDE and gaining a small amount of body fat because you're in a small calorie surplus that is just enough to build muscle and gain strength. But even in the second case, and even if you're doing everything perfectly, you will still gain some fat along with the muscle. That's why you should only start with the bulk if you're lean enough to do so. If on the other hand you're already somewhat overweight, then you will just end up getting even fatter. The additional fat will also mask your muscle growth, which makes your body transformation look less impressive, and it can even be demotivating if you're seeing yourself go from fat to even fatter. But if you're a skinny guy or girl and are naturally lean, then you have some room to work with. You can gain some body fat along with the muscle you're building and still look fairly decent the entire time because you will go from skinny to normal. At this point, you will probably ask yourself, what exactly is skinny enough? Well, even though this is a highly personal thing, let me give you a few general guidelines. For men, you want to be below 15% body fat. 12% or lower would be even better. And for women, below 23% body fat is a good rule of thumb. Keep in mind that the lower your current body fat percentage, the more room you have to gain fat and still look good. So if you start your bulk at 10% as a guy, you can go all the way up to 15% before I would recommend you stop. But if you're already at 13% or 14%, then you have less room, and at the end of your bulk, you will probably be above 15%. One more problem we need to talk about is that you probably don't know your current body fat percentage. Am I right? So here's my advice to you. Take your shirt off and look in the mirror. Then ask yourself if you look like someone whose number one goal right now should be to lose fat or to build muscle. Be honest with yourself and use your best unbiased judgment. Would you consider yourself at least somewhat lean and ready to start gaining more mass? Or would you consider yourself a little too fat to gain even more weight? To help you out, here are two pictures. If you look like this guy or this girl, you can probably start with a bulk. Now, for some people, these two will look very skinny already, and that's because they are. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't bulk if you're not as lean as them, but just that you might end up fatter than you're comfortable with, and that it might be better to start cutting first. And this brings me to the second point, which is who should cut first? This question is easy because I kind of already answered it before. You should probably cut first if you aren't lean enough to bulk. This would obviously include anyone who's overweight or obese, as well as anyone who's above the ideal range for bulking that we just talked about. That means men who have a body fat percentage of over 15% and women with a body fat percentage of over 23%. If this applies to you, it's usually better to focus on fat loss first with a calorie deficit. Once you have reached the ideal body fat percentage for bulking, you can then transition and switch to a calorie surplus. Of course, you always want to do resistance training during the entire process. Some people think that if they need to cut first, that means they should also hold off on the resistance training and make no attempt at building muscle until it's time for them to start bulking. That's nonsense. Not just because resistance training is necessary to maintain muscle when you're cutting, but also because many beginners can actually build muscle and lose fat at the same time. Which brings me to the third option, which people usually call body recompositioning. Body recompositioning refers to the art of building muscle and losing fat at the same time. I often get asked if it's possible and if you should try it. Well, here's my take on this. Yes, it is possible, but only for a very specific type of person. They need to be a complete beginner to resistance training, and they also need to be slightly overweight. The reason for this is simple. Their untrained body will respond very well to the new training stimulus and build muscle faster than someone who's more experienced. At the same time, the small amount of excess body fat that they have can compensate for the calorie deficit and provide extra energy for the body. But keep in mind that this is not a long-term strategy. I know the idea of building muscle and losing fat at the same time sounds amazing, but you have to understand that this is going to be an extremely slow process for most people, and usually it's better to focus just on muscle growth or just on fat loss instead. So unless you belong to the category of people I just talked about, do yourself a favor and start with one or the other instead of trying to do both at the same time.